Hello and welcome to Comic Cuts, the panel show. I'm Kev F and my guests today are Shelly Bond and Davy Francis.
Hello.
Hello.
Comic Cuts. We're looking at a panel and we comprise a panel. There's a few of us. So the panel sees a panel and we talk about the comics from the panel we discuss and we call it Comic Cuts.
My excuse is that it's still early in LA and I'm not finished with my second cup of PG tips.
Do you know, I thought LA was an early to bed, early to rise city. Am I wrong?
Hey, I don't know. I make comics 24/7, so I'm part of my own network here.
Yeah, I guess comics is kind of antisocial. Whenever we think of LA, we think of the movie biz, but does it dominate the city as much as we imagine?
No, not at all.
And when we think of Belfast, Davy, we think of Blue Lights. Does it, the cop
Right,
drama,
yes.
dominate the city?
No, funny. I was doing a line of duty walking tour yesterday
All
with
right.
some American visitors. So they were very into the show and knew every episode and that type of thing. So we
Well,
we went
Bel
around all day.
Belfast has become the new Hollywood lately, hasn't it? With
Yeah,
Game of
that's right.
Thrones and so much
Crypt-
filming.
Krypton, Krypton was filmed here. The new Blade Runner TV show was filmed here. Game of Thrones, of course. Dairy Girls. Um, they filmed what's the one about the world turning, or
The one with the world
you know
turning,
the one
you really
with
would have to narrow that down.
Right?
it's a war series. It'll come to me. It's the one about the guy out of the In-Betweeners, isn't it?
Oh,
Doug Culkin.
sure. I know what you're talking about.
Yes,
Yeah, I know
that's
what
it.
you're talking about. Yeah, well, listen, instant access to everything at all times has
Yeah.
helped us, I think,
Yeah.
become a part of, become this really integrated in the global landscape. So, but you're in a terrific place.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
lovely.
I do a lot of work in Northern Ireland myself. I was just telling Davey I'm going to be doing all of the art centres from Enniskillen to Omagh on down from there. And I love it because there's lots of great places and loads of kids hungry to learn comics. So I've become a Northern Islander file. But Shelley, you early on were an Anglophile.
Indeed. I always wanted to escape from America, and somehow I managed to marry the British guy, but he kind of likes it here. So we have yet to migrate back to England, which is my goal one day to live in London. But yeah, I think since I discovered David Bowie in 1974 at overnight camp, I heard Rebel Rebel on the radio, Davy, and that was it. I just like loved David Bowie and was inspired by British music, and here we are.
I mean, it's
Mhm.
very much a case of the other man's grass is always, well, in the case of Britain, the other man's grass is always flooded, I think. Davey, what was your music of childhood?
Well, certainly in LA, the grass isn't green; it's brown, isn't it?
Yeah, the grass isn't
Um,
real.
what was that question again? What was my early
What was your music as a kid?
music? Well, it was the Beatles, really, first off. And then, funny enough, a guy called Jackie Burns, I was at school with. You might know him as Jake Burns from Stiff Little Fingers.
Wow.
We were in school together, and actually, we were the only two people in our class who passed the 11 plus, and we both won an English composition prize for Typhoon Tea, not PG Tips, Typhoon Tea, and we had to go up in front of the class and get our certificates. Um, but he said, "Oh, come back to the house at lunchtime." We lived his house was near the school, and we went back to his house at lunchtime, reading comics and that type of thing. And he put on some of his dad's music, and one of the pieces of music he put on was oh, and I've forgotten it now. It's a great guitar tune. There's no words in it. It's
Do you know what? I'm going to have great fun editing out the bits where we're almost remembering,
I
and
know, but
then
remember,
it's the
it's,
one
I'm
where the
so
world
nervous.
turns.
I'm so nervous. I'm so nervous about being in front of millions of people. You see, that's what it is. Um,
I heard there were only 3 people that are watching and listening to this, right? I heard
I I think
Kev
that's
said it was.
dangerously close to the truth.
Yeah, Kev said that it was just going to be Mark Buckingham and a couple of other people I know in
oh,
comics that were
perfect.
going to
Go
listen
ahead.
to this.
And
I have
Stephen
to know,
Yeah,
Hawking.
I
Shelley.
have to know though, please tell me. You said you were into the Beatles. I'm a Kinks fan. Did you like
Hmm.
the Kinks as
Oh
well?
yes, the Kinks. Yes,
All right.
yes, dedicated
Phew.
Father Passion and Waterloo Road. And you know it's lovely in France. They sing "Aux Champs-Élysées," which is the same tune, and
Mm.
it's a lovely tune. But it's Waterloo Road.
I hate to be that guy, but it's Waterloo Sunset.
Oh, Waterloo Sunset.
I'm going to feel really unkind every time I correct you on anything, Davey. And yet I can't help thinking it's going to
That's your
happen.
It's
job. Come
Waterloo
on, Kev.
Sunset's a
That's your
different.
job.
Shelley, how hard was it to come across this music when you were a kid growing up? Because it's not like there was MTV and it's not like you could dial up any tune. How did you hear the stuff?
Oh, come on. I'm not 100 yet. I
No,
turn
but
100 in 2 months.
was it college radio? Was it?
No, it was way before that. And by the way, Kev, there was life before MTV, although my life did start on August 1st, 1981. I was glued to MTV and I did walk around dreaming of meeting Adamant, of course. But we actually had, I lived outside of a Philadelphia, so I was an hour and 6 minutes from a major metropolitan area. So I would go to record shops and I was sometimes lucky enough to yank an import out of somebody's hand and run to the register. And I also found out a lot about British music from cable television because there was a show called Night Flight that would run like on weekends from midnight to 3, and I'd be watching it in my attic on a black and white TV, which does make me sound like I'm 100, but they ran Erga Music War, the video. I discovered like the Clash and other bands just by accident, by staying up late and, being bad and watching TV. But don't forget the Kinks they had a big album out in like 79. So, we kind of got that second wave of mod. And, a lot of that music came over to the States and most
This
people didn't like it, but I didn't care. I kind of did my own thing and I gravitated towards it, and here we are.
this was a big divide that we found back here because we'd have our bands that we were championing, the British bands, the homegrown bands, especially punk and new wave when I was growing up. And then we'd have our fingers crossed that they were going to break the States. And then we'd send them all over there. And like the Flock of Seagulls would be the hit. And everybody else would come back with their tails between their legs.
Ridiculous, right? I mean, those were not the bands that we wanted. I think Breaking America was so different back then in the early 80s, but you guys to this day have superior songwriters and musicians, I will say. I mean, Suede, Pulp, come on. You guys create the next wave superstars. And I think a lot of, bands like The Cure and Echo and the Bunnymen, they made it over and got pretty huge on college radio. I was a DJ in college, so I like to think I helped usher in that next wave of synth pop, a little bit new romantic, punk and new wave.
Well, yeah, the 90s when you were Vertigo. Vertigo was you, you were Vertigo. And the music of the then Britpop era and comics had a big crossover. There was, of course, Philip Bond, your future husband, working for Deadline alongside Jamie Hewlett, who would become Gorillaz. And there was another band whose comic
Cud.
I bought recently, Cud, because I just
Yes,
bought Geezer. I bought it, in
the
fact,
Cud band,
from Will
right?
Potter.
The Cud band should have made it big in the States. The Cud band should have been a part of Britpop. Sadly, they were probably a year and a half too early for that, but they're brilliant. Davey, do you know the Cud band?
Yeah, are you
I,
familiar with Cud?
I've never heard of the cut. I've remembered the name of that song.
Oh yeah,
It's called Albatross
Albatross by Fleetwood Mac.
by Fleetwood Mac. Yes, and I'd never heard anything like it before. It blew my mind because I was so used to the Beatles, and then I realised there were other different things out there that you could look at, and don't not be afraid to try. you know, comics. I don't mean like drugs. It was only about 8 or 9, but different genres and things to read and that type of thing.
I'm racking my brain trying to find a link between Albatross and Cud to get us back to where we were. And they don't
Oh,
even
well,
have any letters in common.
no, they don't.
Very weird.
Uh, well, cut is duck backwards, and they're both birds, aren't they? So
There you
maybe
go.
that's
There you go.
yeah,
Well done.
simple.
There
Davy
we
wins
have it.
200
Thank
points
you.
for Davy on this. I wasn't even sure if this was a game show. There we go.
Yeah,
It's my duck call.
I think we're
My duck
definitely
call.
introducing that competitive round. Now, my two to return us to the subject in hand, my two guests have brought with them a panel from a comic or something close, and we're going to see if we can identify it and talk about it. Maybe we'll learn something about comics and something about our guests, or maybe we'll just show off and have a fun chat. Maybe we'll win points in the new game show element, which is what's Davy going to remember next? Let's see. Um, so we've all brought in panels, and I'm going to start. Well, I quite often start by the easy one, choosing the easy one first. But you have both foxed me. I have no idea what either of your panels are. So we're going to begin, Davy, by
Yeah,
looking at the panel you have brought in. Now,
yes,
before you give away any secrets, Shelley,
yes.
I'm going to ask you to describe what you see. Listeners at home, you'll find this image on the show notes. You'll find it on the holding image. If you're watching on YouTube, it's there on the screen and it's on the website. But you shouldn't need any of those because Shelley, through the gift of her verbal
Yeah.
powers, shall now describe what are we looking at?
We are looking at a two shot, and I like to call this one the Great American Ear Shot. It's a two shot that shows profiles of two people having a conversation. The man on the left is an elderly gent, and we know this because he's pointing his finger at the person on the right, the young person who looks a bit startled, and he knows someone's wagging a finger at him. That young person has dark hair, looks like he might be a teenager, and there is definitely a discussion going on that looks a bit terse. We've got a narrative caption, and then we've got what looks like a thought balloon, but it clearly is not going to the person's head. So it's a scalloped balloon that's pointing to the man on the left who has something definitive to say. And the person on the right also has a scalloped balloon and he's responding. The background looks like they're in an office or a house. We see some blinds that are drawn. So something's afoot.
Can I just say that is the most perfect technical description of a panel that we have ever had on this podcast to date. Shelley is an
Wait,
editor. Shelley
can I
is
can I
the
be paid in
editor's
chocolate?
editor.
I'd like to be paid in British chocolate for that.
Yeah. Hey, that must be something you miss in LA.
Oh, yes. I'm a Yorkie milk chocolate kind of person for anybody listening who wants to send me chocolate.
Hey, there you go. Just address it to Shelly Bond LA. It'll get there. So, from my point of view, if I can just chip in with the panelologist's description of the panel, I really can't do better than Shelley. Shelley really knows the technology. In fact, scalloped balloons, I would not have known that. I would have said they're a slightly bubbly shape, which is the shape that one formally makes thought bubbles. Thought bubbles are usually lumpy, a balloony shape or cloud shape, and voice bubbles, speech bubbles, balloons. I say
Word
bubble rather than
balloon.
balloons. Word balloons are usually a smoother shape. This comic's not doing that, which suggests to me this is from before the times when these rules had been much more set in stone, much more regulated. There's also, I think, a few rules being broken, aren't they? The heads overlapping the balloons to the degree they do. The size of the lettering, slightly larger than I think we subsequently become used to. And the guy on the right, the child on the right, his eye is simply a dot in the French ligne claire style. And that suggests to me that this drawing could be as long ago as the 30s. Shelley, would you like to have a guess at what you think we're looking at?
No.
Well, I want you to.
I really have no idea. I look at the lettering and it's beautiful
Mm.
and it suggests to me that it might even be digital. And I
Now,
and I hope it's not
well,
because I'm a big fan of hand lettering. But it looks to me like it could be from the 30s, but it looks to me like it could also be from 2022. I'm not
well,
sure.
Davy, you're going to have to put us out of our misery. I'm going to make my one stab guess
Mhm.
because the kid is called Billy. The kid who's
Yeah.
being pointed to, the old man is saying, "Nothing's been heard of Savannah for some time, Billy.
Oh,
Go
sorry,
out and dig something up."
Shazam. Shazam.
I think I was going to say the same as Shelley's just said, that it could
I
be
think
the.
I'm going to get more chocolate than you, Kev.
Well,
You're
I
go
going.
on.
didn't,
Tell
to
us
be
more.
fair, I didn't read. You showed me the image and you told me to describe it, and I didn't read it. I didn't have a moment to read it. But now that you said Billy,
So
I
tell us
have to
more.
step on your hands and toes. And I'm going to say Marvel Shazam.
So that would be
Captain.
the character Captain Marvel,
Yes.
created by C.C. Beck and
That's correct.
published by I don't know who.
Oh, I can't remember who it was. But the unusual thing about this strip is that it was drawn by Jack Kirby.
Really? So tell us, are we right about it being the original Captain Marvel?
It is the original Captain Marvel, and it came out in the same month. Was it May 1941 as in America? So at the time, Kirby was ghosting different strips, and of course he drew Green Arrow and things like that, and a lot, and created the Challengers of the Unknown for DC.
Yeah.
But it was his triad Captain Marvel.
So where does this come from? Because it's in black and white rather than color, which it would have originally been printed in.
It came from a website. I just
Right.
cut it off. I should really look for a color version, but it's quite nice in black and white, isn't it?
It is. I prefer an awful lot of stuff in black and white simply because the coloring quite often didn't do justice to the artwork in the early days of printing.
It adds a sort of a like an 80s zine look to it, doesn't it, or something like that? You know, a sort of a something
Well,
more contemporary.
It's a nice high contrast. It's very few lines. You
Yes,
well,
know,
that's right.
I
I
think
mean,
that
I was
and
going to say
and
one artist that you've worked with a lot, Shelley, Michael Allred. His style is very heavily influenced by this kind of original, I wouldn't say retro, but I'd say style from back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mike Allred is one of the masters of my generation in terms of spotting blacks and really utilizing that high contrast between positive and negative spaces on the page, and a master of really using very few lines, mostly using one solid line to really articulate every gesture and every background and every moment, that we're faking when we're trying to show motion on a 2D surface. So, yeah.
That term spotting blacks is one that I haven't heard for a long time. It really goes back to the black and white outline days of artwork, which I was obviously doing when I was inking Marvel art in the 1990s. But in more recent years, the coloring techniques have played a dominant part, haven't they, in the finished artwork?
Yeah, but I still think that it's important for anyone, editor, artist, writer, to think about how comics really work best in black and white. To me, color can't save an illustration or a page if the art isn't all there in black and white. So I tend to be the kind of editor to make sure that before any color is even considered, the artist really captures what we need on the page. The nuance really separates the background, midground, foreground, and tells the story that needs to be told in high contrast, black and white, before anything else adds to it, because color cannot save bad art. And I think
That,
that happens a lot in comics now, where people just keep throwing color and throwing effects on the page. And it's hard to know what to read first. And when you break the reading order of a comic, you break the story.
yeah.
It's a complete fail.
I mean, technology has played a big part in that because a lot of people are working on the screen and they're working in layers. And Whereas once upon a time, you had to have the pencils followed by the inks because only the inks would print, and the printing was so primitive that only bold inks would print and fine hatching wouldn't, and pencils wouldn't. That changed, well, 30, 40 years ago. But now a lot of those processes aren't even the processes people use, are they?
It's true. And I'm curious what Davy thinks about that. Davy,
Yeah,
do you think it's important for an artist to be able to like finish a panel or a page in line before
Well,
going on to color?
yeah, well, I do that, I'm sort of a bit backward about technology. I sort of I don't really have access to you know, Photoshop and that type of thing. Um, but I have dabbled with it, but I prefer just to do the whole thing, uh, the whole page and as is. And I don't even use pencils. Sometimes the only pencils I use are for the actual frame outlines.
For the panel
really.
borders.
Because
Yeah,
That's
and so,
interesting.
what characterizes your artwork for me, Davy, is the fineness of your lines. You do shaping and sculpting and hatching in your cartoon
yes.
drawings. And listener, if you don't know Davy's work, check out the entire back catalogue of Oink. And especially if you can ever find a comic called Hoof Hearted. It's a Western comic whose title is best said by Davy. What's the magazine called, Davy?
It's called Who Farted? When,
Isn't that
whenever
the operative question of anyone at any age? Now
whenever
that's talk
sorry.
about all through the generations, appealing to anyone from the age of 2 months old to 200 years old. There you go.
Art
But
jokes are always funny.
well, Davy, I've just been reading your latest publication, The Gift, and your artwork. Actually, in some of the printing, you see the wrinkling of the paper. So you're using watercolor on soft paper?
Well, what happened was I actually was in a shop and I found this lovely photo album. It was just a little white card, a square, and I thought, oh, must have a it looked like nice paper, so I just bought it and started to draw on it, and then the story sort of came out on the in the little book, you see. Um,
So you were
and then,
Awesome.
kind of making it up as you went along, working straight onto those pages.
that's right,
There's a
yes.
song with that title, by the way, Kev. Name that band, Kev.
What,
We're
making it
making
up?
it up as we go along.
I actually don't know.
All
Is
right,
it?
you'll have to find out. I'm not spilling the beans there. But Davey, I like your style. I think that's a great way to make art. I'm a big fan of urgent art, and
Yeah,
I'm
thanks.
jealous of musicians who can write songs and in 3 minutes pour their guts out
Uh,
to, their fans or themselves. And I think that's a great way to actually tell a story, personal story.
well, we sort of had the skeleton of the story, and then um, I showed it to Peter Duncan, who was the editor of it, and he said, "Well, I've shown it to people who aren't into comics and don't know the whole origin of certain characters and that type of thing." So I went back and added more pages, and then as I looked over it, I thought, "Oh, need another page in there." Give it a bit of balance and that type of thing, and sort of show how things have changed through it and that type of thing. So it's turned out it's 52 pages, but
Yeah, it's a 52-page book, The Gift, which I don't think it's too much of a spoiler. It's kind of a parallel to the Batman story, but a sweeter, cartoony retelling with new characters.
sort of a pastiche or a
Yeah.
sort of Batman, and but I love that whole idea of him having a butler and but having this huge bat cave in the basement. And then I was thinking to myself, well, of course, Batman drives in the Batmobile in the big road, and I thought to myself, who made that road? Because it can't be workmen because you'd have to kill them,
Exactly.
So it had to be Alfred. And then
Mm.
when you see the movies, it gets even more ridiculous because there's a whole lake opening up and the bat crawler or whatever it is comes out, and you think to yourself, who on earth built that? Unless it was Rachel Waller or somebody like that. But you sort of think Alfred has a lot to do. He's got a big house to look after, the garden and everything, and make sure Batman's wounds are stitched up and that type of thing. So
I think he has a doppelganger.
uh,
Do you
I,
know
th- I, I
it
think
was
he's
the
that alien. He just hasn't completely
Yeah,
changed. You know.
yeah.
It was the 1980s where this kind of thinking set in, wasn't it? When we started asking questions like who changes the tires on the Batmobile. Before that, there was a great suspension of disbelief that
Sure.
it's hard to get back to.
Yeah.
Like Tracy Island in Thunderbirds. How can these things exist? Even James Bond villains, it's in a much more realistic world, and yet it's impossible. There was a time when we would allow for a lot more impossible things than I think we let slip through. Kids do, of course. Kids don't care.
Mhm.
We were looking at Captain Marvel. Davey,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about Captain Marvel, the comic, because it's got a lot of story to it.
Well, Captain Marvel, that comic that you showed a copy or a fragment of, you can see the Kirby influences in some of the other panels. It shows that one because there wasn't a lot of Kirby in it. Maybe the man's hand, when he points his finger, you can see some of the sinews in the hand, and I thought that they were very Kirby, but you didn't pick up on it.
When I see Kirby artwork from the 1940s, it doesn't look like Kirby artwork to me. It isn't until the 50s when he's doing the romance comics that you start to see characteristic cheekbones and shaping that
So,
we then recognize from things like the Marvel superhero comics. But the 40s stuff, his figure drawing is just different. It has a lot of different styles to it.
the thing I like about that is if you look at the background, there's no straight lines. They're lines, but there's no, they're not perfectly straight.
The
You
verticals
know,
aren't vertical.
No.
the only
But
straight
it
line.
tells you everything you need to know where you are and who you're with in the scene. And that to me is critical. It even tells you how to get out by
Uh,
establishing a window.
There's a lot I like about the 30s and 40s early comic artwork that has a happy amateurism to it. Like, for example, looking at this composition, a lot of editors would have said, actually, your guys aren't quite positioned right. Look at all that space behind Billy. That's kind of wasted space. And the overlapping voice bubbles and the stems, which seem to be going into the backs of people's heads. There's a lot of things that you simply wouldn't allow now, but then the game was different, wasn't it? A lot more about producing at speed, producing at quantity.
yes, but it's nice. It's a lovely layout, isn't it? There's a simplicity. It could have been just done with a blank um, background, but it wouldn't be the same. You sort of feel there's more story to it with that background. The more detail. What's in his bureau, and who's the picture of, and that type of thing. What happened to the string in his vertical blinds?
Yeah, I actually think they're outdoors. I
Uh,
think they're stood in front of a shop doorway.
Interesting. And I just see a tangent where the man on the left's word balloon line is extending into a needle pointer. All I
Yeah.
see now is a tangent. Now I'm breaking out into a rash now that I see a tangent.
Listeners at home, this is another one of these editorial terms that you'll only hear from a professional editor, and that's a professional art editor too. A tangent is when one line joins into another line which it's not supposed to. So the edge of a building lining up with a caption box, that would be a no-no. What
Breaks
would
the
be other
story.
examples?
But it's still very beautiful.
It
It's
is
just
beautiful. And the thing that I was hoping you were going to tell us about Captain Marvel is that Captain Marvel isn't the Captain Marvel you're thinking of, because it was a character created for one publishing company as a kind of rip-off of Superman, and then national periodicals who published Superman took them to court and stopped them publishing.
so it became Shazam, and
Change of
still,
name.
isn't it?
Clearly, I'm the only person who finds that story interesting. Nobody wants to elaborate.
I'm not a superhero person, and everything I know about Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, I gleaned from Tom Scioli's biographies about both Stan the Man and Jack Kirby Crackle. So I can tell you that the first time I heard Shazam was on from television in the 70s when there was a live action
Yeah.
series on Saturdays called Shazam. So I'm not a superhero fan or purist, but I do find this fascinating. And I think it was a really good choice, Davey.
And it's another
I
example of the great difference that we had between the UK and the US, because in the comics, we would see the adverts for the Saturday morning TV, and we'd see adverts for the Fantastic Four animation, and for the Shazam animation, and for Spidey and Friends was another. And I didn't get to see these probably until the YouTube days, at which point I discovered they were shit.
Yeah,
but
they were not great.
you want to watch the Captain Planet Goes to Belfast one? It's spectacularly shit.
Does that actually exist?
Yeah, and somebody tries to detonate an atomic bomb in Belfast, and Captain Planet and his chums have to stop them. It's really, it's one of those ones where all the Irish people have Scottish accents, that type of thing, and it's sort of a cringe, when you listen to the accents. It's
There's
like
a lot of groundskeeper Willie going on.
there is, yes. Now, funny enough, that was a little tenuous link between Kirby and Belfast. Jack Kirby, of course, produced thousands of pages of artwork, but the person who produced the most artwork was Kurt Swan.
Hmm.
And,
Interesting. I will
and
jump in and
Uh,
say that for me, Alex Toth was the hero of cartoons of my youth.
yeah,
So, and Johnny Quest and Marine Boy were the two animated shows that I liked in the 70s and 80s. But I must say that it's fascinating to hear some of this history. So thanks for sharing.
Alex
well,
Toth and Jack Kirby, of course, both came from comics to doing the character designs for animation, where there was way more money to be had. The Kurt Swan link, before we
Kurt,
forget.
so Kurt Swan, of course, produced thousands of pages of comics, but actually, he first got his big break when he was a soldier stationed in Omagh in Northern Ireland, where
What?
you're dancing. And it was during the big push for D-Day. So they were all sort of brought over and billeted and that type of thing. And some officers saw his drawings and thought he'd be perfect to paint a mural for the officers' club in the Central Hotel in Belfast. So he painted a mural for the Central Hotel, and somebody from Stars and Stripes, the newspaper, saw his work, saw the mural, and then, of course, he started working for Stars and Stripes, and from Stars and Stripes was picked up in DC Comics.
That
Wow.
represents everything I tell my comics editing students. You have to get visible, and
Yeah.
then the world will notice. You have to get your hands dirty and throw red and black ink, put some lines down, make your own comics and zines, get visible, and others will follow.
Yeah.
Hopefully, you'll make money.
And we have to hope that if you are going to launch a career in comics, you don't have to wait until the next World War to be
No,
seen.
Exactly. Although, let's face it,
yeah.
sadly, we're living
Thing,
in strange times.
Things bode badly in that way. Well, we've just been having a look at a bit of Captain Marvel stroke Shazam drawn by Jack Kirby, which we weren't expecting. Should we have a look at what Shelley's brought in?
Yes, this ought to be good.
Listener at home, you'll see it in all the places I described earlier. That is, if you want to see it. Davy, brace yourself and describe what you can see on the screen.
well, there's a man, he looks like a sort of a rockabilly type of guy, kind of Elvis inspired. He's got the big quiff, he's got sideburns and spotty face type of thing. He's got a leather jacket and he's kissing a young woman very passionately. Her eyes are closed, his eyes are closed. Uh, Both of their mouths are open, which suggests that it's a more modern comic. And she seems to be pressed against a wall. He's got his hands behind her head on the wall. They're pressing against the wall. Um, And I'm not sure where her hands are. It seemed to be, oh no, one of them, their fingers on her throat, but I think they're her fingers. And apart from that, he's wearing a watch. And it says, can I read this out? He
Yeah.
pressed lips to hers, um, forcing her mouth wide to accept his um, oh,
Black.
back puss.
Pus-filled tongue.
So I don't think it's a sort of a romance comic. It looks a bit, it's not unlike David Lapham's work, um, but I don't think it is.
It is.
We can safely say it's not the Beano. And from the technical angle, although I can never do justice to this description, having had Shelley describe the previous one so well, it's line art. I would say it's actual brush art, although it could be from a vintage that could be digital, but I think it's not digital. The lettering at the top has been done on mock lined paper to suggest it comes from a diary entry. So we're looking at storytelling where someone is taking the pages of a diary, using those as the captions that accompany the live action, or
Spotted black.
summed up. Sorry.
There are spotted blacks in it too, Kev.
Oh yeah,
Over on
look at the
the side of,
spotting of those blacks.
Right?
yes, not
You
sure
can
about
practically feel the sh-
yeah,
the highlights on that leather jacket. You can hear the crinkling of that faux leather jacket. And I
yeah.
think that the quiff, that rockabilly quiff is just beautifully inked. Would you say, Davy, that looks pretty nice?
Yes, it looks really nice. Just nice feathering on the hair there, just over his ear.
We ought to
But
publish a glossary to go with this episode. We have had every technique described. Feathering is, of course,
It's going to cost you more in chocolate, Kev.
uh,
feathering all kinds of
listener at
different.
home, feathering is that shaped line that you've seen all the time with inking, with black line on a white background, where the line starts off thick, it goes down thin, just like a feather. It's called feathering.
Mhm.
And how about that hard edge shadow on the jacket?
Well,
It's
we're just
nice.
showing off now.
I
Yeah.
know, I know. So when am I allowed to jump in and tell you who it is?
Well, Davy, you guessed David Lapham, was that right?
But
And Shelley, was that right?
Yes, it is David Lapham. Davy, I'm impressed that you knew that was David Lapham. This is some of his early work from Stray Bullets.
Stray Bullets. Yes, I read a lot of Stray Bullets. The story was riveting in it, and I sort of picked up a lot of them. But I liked his artwork as well.
And David Lapham writes and draws.
He
He's
does,
excellent.
although he co-writes with his wife Maria, who doesn't always get the spotlight. So whenever I talk about David, I mention Maria because she's also part of the brains behind the operation. And I've worked with David quite a few times in my career. I feel
So
lucky,
you
honored
launched
to say
Stray
that.
Bullets.
I did not launch Stray
Oh,
Bullets.
what's the history of Stray Bullets? When did it first appear?
Stray Bullets, I believe, was launched in 1995. And I had been in comics for a good 7 or 8 years at that point. And you know, comics, there were good years and bad years. And I wasn't even sure if I found my place in comics because I always felt like I skewed more indie than a mainstream publisher. But Vertigo was good. They let me flex. But it wasn't till I picked up Stray Bullets #1, read it from cover to cover, that I dropped to my knees and said, I'm a comics lifer. Because I just thought David Lapham and Maria Lapham know how to tell a crime fiction story. And I was certain they were from my generation. And sure enough, I got to meet them. They were, and the rest is history. Because I think that this comic deserved every award and every accolade. And the fact that Stray Bullets continued for many, many years is a testament to indie comics. And in my humble opinion, David Lapham is one of the greatest American storytellers of my generation. And Stray Bullets is the apex of crime fiction storytelling in any medium. Mic drop.
The 90s really did see a breakthrough in realism in comics, didn't it? There were experiments in the 1980s, but the publishing business was really hidebound by that superheroes were all. That clung on for a long time, didn't it?
Ugh. gag. Yes. Well, David and Maria changed that.
And you must have had to do a lot of beating down doors to get well, audiences I think were ready to accept these things, but were the big wigs upstairs always ready to accept new ideas?
Not really. Although I had a much better track record at Vertigo because my boss, Karen Berger,
Mhm.
had my back. And she also believed in publishing stories that were like not conventional, that subverted expectations. And as soon as I could, I hired David Lapham to do work for me. His first book was called Silverfish, which was, if Davy, if you haven't heard of it, you must find it. It was
Uh,
brilliant.
yeah.
Are you
I don't.
familiar with it?
I'm not familiar with it. Um,
We
I
will
always think.
change that.
I always think he's like he kind of writes the way Shane Black writes. You know, there's humor, but there's sort of a blackness to it as well. You know,
Oh,
it's like
yeah.
hard edge. Yeah,
The hard-boiled detective. There was one breakthrough hard-boiled detective story that I read as a kid. Jim Steranko did a thing called Chandler, Red Tide. Did anybody ever see that?
I've heard of it. The one.
1976, and it was this. They were trying to break through the term, or trying to use the term graphic novel for the first time. And so it's a small paperback size. It's got the pictures, and then it's got a paragraph of text underneath. And he's doing it very much in the Raymond Chandler 1940s film noir style. But that was so against the tide at the time in the 1970s. And it was a long time before anything else came along, which was still trying to do that kind of, not superhero stuff, but trying to do crime stuff, trying to do noir.
Daniel Dusk was like that, wasn't it? It wasn't even inked. It was sort of Gene Colan was a
Oh,
sort of a
yes, that was a
artist.
DC title in the 80s, wasn't it?
It was the artwork, and it was beautiful.
That was when they started printing in litho so they could print Gene Colan from pencils.
That's correct. Yes,
Who published Stray Bullets?
It was
um,
first published by David and Maria's El Capitan
that's right.
imprint,
That's right.
but then it eventually moved to Image, and they collected all of the Stray Bullets individual issues into a gigantic phone book sized volume called Uber Alles, which I think is still available. It is a brick. In fact, it can be used as a weapon. It's so big. And it hurts to hold on to it on your lap. I mean, you really might bruise yourself. So I recommend tracking down all the single issues. It's worth it.
The big
Yeah.
question for me was also always how well things were selling because as cool kids in the 90s, we championed all the stuff that Vertigo was doing. I was always loving Sandman Mystery Theatre was a particular favorite for
Yes.
me. But then I'm thinking this can't be selling as much as Superman. Was Superman subsidizing the cool comics or were the cool comics actually really standing on their own?
Well, if you're asking me about Vertigo, David didn't really work for me until the mid 2000s. But I can tell you that, Vertigo really had to have one or two big hits to support all of the more arty titles.
Hmm.
So when Sandman ended officially, we were lucky to have Y the Last Man and Fables to pick up the mantle because those
Right.
books sold well enough that we could start peppering the rest of the line with things that maybe were hit and miss. And I will say that David Lapham's work for Vertigo that I brought to life, um, did well enough to have a cult following. We had Young Liars, which ran for 18 issues, and he actually did a book for my Black Crown imprint years later called Lodger, which was incredible. In fact, it was something that we tried to get Vertigo to publish, but couldn't quite get it approved based on how the market was being very fickle. We really did have to sort of pare down the Vertigo line at that point, maybe in the 20 teens,
Yeah.
because we were
This
seeing
was
changes.
this was a significant thing that the other major comic publisher along those lines, Marvel, wasn't ever, I think, doing anything as experimental as DC did with Vertigo.
Except
And
they did it first with Epic. Archie Goodwin's Epic line was
true,
really amazing. So
but
you could
wasn't it
say that,
short-lived?
It was, but that's again, that's corporate America not understanding that you need to give an imprint more than 2 years to actually reach its audience or cultivate a new audience. It's a shame. But that also happened with the Minx line. I actually launched a line of YA comics back in
Hmm.
'08 and was given 2 years to make that successful. And it ended. But fortunately, many of those writers and artists went on to have terrific careers and pretty much champion the graphic novel movement as we know it now.
Well, yes, I mean, books like Preacher and Lucifer, which have made the crossover into TV and other media, were very
And
much,
iZombie. Speaking of
yeah.
Mike Allred, iZombie was one of those books. And how about Bodies? Cy
Mm,
Spencer's Bodies made
yeah.
the big leap, star-studded cast on Netflix.
Yeah, I mean, it took the best part of 20 years from the inception of these great ideas to them making their transition, but they made it. All testament to you guys keeping the faith and somehow persuading the folks upstairs to keep it going.
Lots of chocolate. British chocolate makes people happy. What can I
Okay, it's
say?
an
You
it's an
don't like
it's a
American chocolate. Don't even
Yeah.
think about American chocolate, Davy. I hope you've never had it.
My daughter lives in Australia, and she says she really misses Greg's vegan sausage rolls. They don't have any Greg's bakeries in
Yeah, neither do we. And I miss Greg's too.
and that's what she really misses, the Greg's.
Our sympathy goes out to all football supporters who must be suffering during the World Cup from the lack of all of these home treats. Well, we've been looking at a couple of crackers, really surprising choices for me, and of course, showing off my idiocy because everybody else knew what they were looking at. We were looking at David Maria Lapham and David Lapham's art from Stray Bullets, chosen by Shelley, and we were looking at, surprisingly, Jack Kirby's artwork on Captain Marvel, aka Shazam, from the 1940s. Thank you both for bringing in such wonderful pieces of work. Where can we find you guys online? Shelley?
Well, you can find me at offregister.press, which is a tiny comics and design lab that I run with my way more famous and cool husband, Philip Bond.
And Davy, where do we find you?
Well, you can find me at Davy Francis Cartoons on Facebook and Sector 13 Comics. They produce some of my most recent work. They
What you're saying is we go into a comic shop and we just hope you're there.
well, what you're looking for is a, a comic called Yao of a 6 page strip in it that never made it to Marvel, and I've got a 16 page strip in Splank, the Splank Annual. It's called Thunderbags. It's about aging superheroes, and um, and then of course the Gift is just out and available from Sector 13 Comics.
That's what we're all looking out for. Thank you to my guests. Let's hear it again for Shelley Bond and Davy Francis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kev.
Comic Cuts. We're looking at a panel, and we comprise a panel. There's a few of us. So the panel sees a panel, and we talk about the comics from the panel we discussed, and we call it Comic Cuts.